What did Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle think about fear of failure? There's a kind of fear that hides under ambition, quiet, invisible, but heavy. It whispers right before you start something new. What if I'm not good enough? What if I try and fail, and everyone sees? Fear of failure doesn't always stop us with panic. It's subtler than that. It makes us delay. It makes us prepare more instead of act. It makes us say someday instead of today. And when we live long enough in that hesitation, the fear begins to disguise itself as wisdom. I'm not ready yet. It's not the right time. But deep down, you know the truth. Fear has learned to speak your language. You can't defeat that fear by pretending it isn't there. You face it only when you understand it, when you see it clearly for what it is. And few people ever understood fear, courage, and action better than three minds who shaped the foundation of all Western thought: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. These three men, teacher, student, and successor, built not just a philosophy, but a map of the human soul. Socrates showed us that fear is ignorance, not knowing what is truly worth fearing. Plato revealed that failure is not the end of truth, but the shadow cast by our imperfect attempts to reach it. Aristotle grounded it all in action, teaching that courage is not the absence of fear, but mastery over it. In this video, we'll listen to one short idea from each, and see how together they can teach us to walk straight through fear of failure and find strength on the other side. He who fears death will never do anything worth living for. Socrates wasn't only talking about literal death. He was speaking of any fear that paralyzes the soul, any avoidance that keeps a person from acting according to their inner truth. To him, fear of failure is a small version of the same illusion that makes us fear death. The illusion that losing something means losing ourselves. Socrates believed that all fear is based on ignorance of what's truly good and what's truly bad. We fear failure because we think it defines us. We think the world will label us less if we try and fall short. But that reaction shows we misunderstand what failure really is. To fail is not to lose worth. It is to confront the limits of what we know. And only someone who risks that confrontation ever learns anything at all. When Socrates faced his own death sentence, he didn't run. He didn't beg for forgiveness or twist his principles to survive. He told the court, "I do not fear death, for I do not know if it is evil." In that one sentence is a model for all fear of failure. You cannot know that something is truly bad until you face it, and to refuse to act out of fear is to choose ignorance over truth. Think of a modern example. Imagine a young artist afraid to publish their first painting online. They hesitate for weeks, adding details, changing colors, restarting completely. The fear doesn't protect them from shame. It only delays the moment they might grow. When they finally post it, the reaction is mixed. A few compliments, a few criticisms. But then something strange happens. The criticism hurts less than the waiting did. They feel lighter, clearer. The failure wasn't deadly at all. It was a beginning. That is what Socrates meant. The only true danger is not knowing. The only real failure is refusing to learn. If you are too afraid to begin because you might fail, you have already done what fear wanted. You've lived a smaller life. Socrates believed that the antidote to this fear is examination. To question yourself every time fear appears. What am I really afraid of losing? Would failure destroy me? Or only my image of perfection? What would I learn if I tried anyway? When you ask those questions honestly, you strip fear of its disguise. It stops sounding like logic and starts sounding like what it truly is. A voice trying to protect your comfort at the cost of your growth. Socrates died with serenity, because he understood that nothing external, not death, not failure, not ridicule, could touch what truly mattered, the soul's pursuit of truth. If you can remember that, then every failure becomes something sacred, a small step toward wisdom, instead of a step away from worth. The greatest mistake is believing that the shadows are the truth. Plato. Plato's words, drawn from his famous allegory of the cave, reach directly into the psychology of fear. Imagine people chained inside a dark cave, forced to look only at shadows on a wall, believing those shapes are reality itself. When one person breaks free and walks toward the light, it blinds him at first. The truth feels overwhelming. But once his eyes adjust, he sees the real world for the first time. Fear of failure works the same way. The shadows are our imagined disasters, humiliation, rejection, disappointment. They're projections, not facts. But to the mind that's never left the cave, those shadows feel real. The possibility of embarrassment becomes as terrifying as pain. The idea of trying and failing feels like falling into darkness. Plato's lesson is simple but radical. Most of our fears are illusions made solid by our belief in them. In creative work, education, or relationships, this illusion plays out constantly. We imagine failure as catastrophic, losing respect, ruining our reputation, proving that we're not as smart or capable as people think. But those are just flickering shapes on the cave wall. The real world outside, the world of action, feedback, and learning, is bright, alive, and full of nuance. Yes, you might stumble, but each stumble shows you where the ground truly is. Think of a student terrified to speak up in class. In their mind, a single wrong answer equals ridicule. They picture classmates smirking, the teacher disappointed, the self-image collapsing. That's their shadow world. But when they finally raise their hand and speak, the room doesn't collapse. Maybe they're wrong, maybe right, but the world stays solid. Reality was kinder than imagination, and the fear, once tested, dissolves. Plato believed philosophy is the process of turning away from shadows toward light, a painful but necessary act. Fear of failure keeps us chained to the wall. It makes us confuse safety with truth. The light burns our eyes at first, the sting of imperfection, the shock of criticism. But that sting is growth. That's the soul adapting to reality. Failure, in Plato's sense, isn't a punishment. It's the moment we stop mistaking shadows for truth. Each time you fail, you see a bit more clearly. You learn what works, what doesn't, where your limits are. It's not pleasant, but it's the only way to know what's real. And that's why the people who never risk failure never actually know themselves. They stay in the cave, worshipping the safety of shadows, opinions, appearances, the illusion of competence. But Plato would call that a tragedy. To live your entire life staring at fictions because you were too afraid to walk into the light. So, next time fear of failure whispers to you, when it says, "You might embarrass yourself," or "People will laugh if you mess up," remember Plato's warning. That's not the truth speaking. That's the shadow. Turn toward the discomfort, not away from it. Because that's where the real world begins, and where courage takes its first breath. We become brave by doing brave acts. Aristotle. With that one line, Aristotle dismantles every excuse that fear of failure tries to build. He doesn't say we must feel brave before acting. He doesn't say courage comes from reflection, preparation, or waiting until fear disappears. He says the opposite. You only become courageous by doing the thing that scares you. Aristotle believed that all virtues are formed by repetition, that character is a habit, not a thought. Just as you learn to play an instrument by playing, you learn courage by acting in spite of fear. This view is brutally honest and strangely liberating, because it kills the illusion that you can think your way into confidence. You can't. You must practice it. Most people misunderstand courage. They imagine it as an emotional state, a sudden rush of strength or a fearless mindset that descends when you're ready. But Aristotle saw courage as a pattern of behavior, something built step by step, choice by choice. You earn courage only when you walk forward trembling. Think about the first time someone speaks in front of an audience. Their heart races, their hands shake, their voice cracks. They don't feel brave, but they speak anyway. That's the first act. The second time, it's a little easier. The third time, easier still. Then one day, they realize they're calm, grounded, expressive. And people call them confident. What they've built isn't talent, it's habit. That's the heart of Aristotle's philosophy. Virtue is not a gift, it's a muscle. And, like any muscle, it grows only under tension. Fear of failure is that tension. When you move through it, your capacity expands. When you avoid it, the muscle withers. He called this process the golden mean, the balance between cowardice and recklessness. Cowardice is paralysis, doing nothing out of fear. Recklessness is blindness, rushing into danger without thought. Courage lives in the center, knowing fear exists, but choosing action anyway. Aristotle would argue that failure itself is part of this balance. You don't become virtuous by succeeding all the time. You become virtuous by facing difficulty well. Every time you fall short, you gather data about how to do better next time. That feedback loop, fear, action, mistake, correction, is the entire process of human excellence. To modernize, this looks like resilience training. You put yourself into slightly uncomfortable challenges over and over until your nervous system stops overreacting to fear. In psychology, this is called exposure therapy, the systematic desensitization of fear through repetition. Aristotle predicted it over 2,000 years ago. He would tell you, don't wait until you're not afraid. Do the thing while afraid, then do it again. Because fear isn't an obstacle. It's the raw material courage is made from. Every trembling step forward is one stroke of the sculptor's chisel shaping your strength. So, when you hesitate before starting a project, sending a message, applying for something, speaking up, remember Aristotle's sentence. You're not waiting for courage. You're building it. You're in the act of becoming the kind of person who no longer fears failure. Not because failure vanished, but because you've learned it's survivable. That's how Aristotle turns fear of failure into a discipline. It's not something to overcome once, but something to practice overcoming every day. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle together form a perfect cycle of transformation. Socrates begins by challenging your illusion of danger, reminding you that fear is born from ignorance, not reality. Plato continues by showing you that your imagined failures are shadows, projections of your mind that vanish when you confront them. And Aristotle finishes the work by grounding it in life. You conquer fear not through understanding alone, but through deliberate action. To see it as a whole, Socrates gives you the courage to question fear. Plato gives you the clarity to see through its illusions. Aristotle gives you the method to walk beyond it. Together, they show that the fear of failure isn't a flaw. It's a signal that you're standing at the edge of growth. The discomfort you feel isn't a warning to retreat, but an invitation to move forward consciously. Every philosopher of the ancient world, in one form or another, was saying the same thing. The quality of your life depends on your relationship with fear. Fear will always whisper. It will always invent futures that never happen. But wisdom teaches you to smile at those ghosts, to say, I see you, but I'm walking anyway. 5 practical steps to overcome. Fear of failure. 1. Name the fear clearly. Write down exactly what you're afraid will happen. Most fears lose power when they're specific. I'll look stupid isn't a fact. It's a thought. Separate imagination from possibility. 2. Do one small brave act. Daily. Don't wait for a huge challenge. Start tiny. Speak up once, post one idea, ask one question. Each small act teaches your brain that fear doesn't equal danger. 3. Reframe failure as data. When something doesn't work, treat it like an experiment. What did you learn? What variable needs adjusting? Science moves forward through failure. So does the soul. 4. Study the fearless, not the perfect. Read about people who failed publicly and kept moving. Artists, scientists, entrepreneurs, philosophers, their stories rewire your idea of failure from shame to progress. 5. Create a ritual of reflection. At the end of the day, ask, did I act in spite of fear today? If yes, celebrate. If no, ask why, without judgment. Awareness builds consistency. Consistency builds courage.